Act 1, Scene 4. Duncan, his sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, and a couple of attendants meet. They're either on a field near where they were before, which is some remove from the battlefield, or perhaps they're back at a castle now. It's a little uncertain, but they just gather, and Duncan asks about, well, what happened to the Thane of Cawdor? Has he been killed? I ordered the execution. Has it been done? He's interested significantly in the consequences of his action. He gave an order. Has it been carried out? Action, consequences. Curious. He asks his son Malcolm, chimes in, "My liege, they are not yet come back, but I have spoke with one that saw him die, who did report that very frankly he confessed his treasons, implored your highness's pardon, and set forth a deep repentance. Nothing in his life became him like the leaving it. He died as one that had been studied in his death to throw away the dearest thing he owed, as 'twere a careless trifle." A lot going on in that little response right there. First of all, that notion of, well, we don't know the consequences just yet. They are not yet come back, predicting the future. These messengers have to come and bring word of the death. But he has spoke with one who saw him died, and who did report. That is secondhand information, but that is also about interpreting information. Interpreting information is so much of the matter of this play, and we will see this again and again and again come up. And also notice the nothing in this life betrayed him or became him like the leaving it is a great line, and you can throw that out in parties and people think you're pretty darn smart. But the whole portrait of what the Thane of Cawdor, the old Thane of Cawdor, was like in death, in facing death, I think is significant, because we hear that he was actually quite stoic about it. He was actually quite accepting of it. All right, I will do so. I will die. Nothing in his life became him like the leaving it. And that sense of graciousness, of admitting his faults, admitting his treasons, and just moving forward and accepting the consequences of his actions, I think is very, very significant, and something to bear in mind. Stick a pin in that idea. Something to bear in mind for later in the play, when we see the new Thane of Cawdor confronting his own mortality and wondering about that. And just a note on that, the idea that this is somebody who is facing death and accepting consequences for it. So much of this play is less explicit, but it is about wondering about the afterlife. What is after death? What is the future, the ultimate future for everyone? And that, I think, is getting touched on very clearly here. Duncan responds, "There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust." First line, there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. Duncan says, you cannot learn, you cannot read someone's intentions, somebody's true character, by seeing what they look like on the outside. It is that importance of the distinction between the interior and the exterior. But also it is a sense that he has come to accept this occurrence. Does he say that there's no art to doing this, to reading people like this, meaning it's so simple anybody could do it? Or does he say it as a declaration that there is no way to do that? I'm not fully certain here, and different actors obviously can take that in different ways. But that second line, he, the former Thane of Cawdor, he was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. So this tells us an awful lot about, well, Duncan. Duncan is very trusting in general, but he was betrayed, and he lashed out and had this person put to death. Arguably not emotionally, just it had to be done. He was a traitor, but still, you get that sense of a personal wounding for him. Duncan is a very personal leader, and that violation of that trust seems to be driving the swift vengeance upon him, but also reflects forward to, well, who walks in next? Enter Macbeth, along with Banquo and the messengers. And so, right after dispatching and considering the trust of this former Thane of Cawdor and the violation of it, here comes Macbeth, who is the new Thane of Cawdor, or is about to be, and is harboring some of his own violations of trust within his heart. Now, Macbeth offers up a happy little speech, exchanging greetings, swearing fealty, all of this diplomatic speech that, frankly, you expect leaders, you expect of politicians. And here, effectively, we have two politicians, the king and his thane. They are performing this outward expression of gratitude. Perhaps Duncan is more sincere in this, more genuine, more trusting of Macbeth than Macbeth deserves. But Macbeth is manifesting this, and maybe he's feeling it too. You can't be sure. Again, this is going to come down to performance. Maybe he's pretending. Maybe he's putting on a false face. Maybe it's really actually how he feels now that he's away from the pressures of, oh my God, I should kill the king so that I can become king. And that is that's another little inflection point for actor interpretation there. But Duncan welcomes Macbeth and Banquo in and says, "Welcome hither. I have begun to plant thee and will labor to make thee full of growing." To Macbeth, saying, using nature imagery, I think significant, but also to express gratitude. I will begun to plant thee. I will plant you in my ground, and you will profit. You will prosper because of this. And then he turns to Banquo, and this I find significant as well. He turns to Banquo after just bestowing all of this wealth and prestige on Macbeth. He turns to Banquo and says, "Noble Banquo, that has no less deserved, nor must be known no less to have done so, let me enfold thee and hold thee to my heart." So while Macbeth gets all the wealth and the prestige and the titles, Banquo gets a hug. And what I think is significant here is that it seems quite sincere. Duncan, picture a big strapping bear of a man. Duncan enfolds Banquo very personally, intimately, like, you're my friend. A kind of currency that is in some ways more gratifying, in some ways more human. He is expressing love for Duncan and sees that as equivalent to the material wealth that he's bestowed on Macbeth. And to his credit, Banquo accepts that and seems to value them equally as well. Banquo says, "There, if I grow, the harvest is your own," matching the nature imagery of planting from Duncan, but also it seems the gracious thing to say, the polite, formal thing to say, and a real sense that, that this is heartfelt, that Banquo appreciates Duncan's expression of love, and they're seeing through everything on the surface as, in some ways, very truthful, very honest, which just brings back to mind the line, "It's hard to read the man's heart through his face, or whatever it was, the construction of the mind through the face of Duncan's. That sense of perception, that sense of reading, interpreting somebody else's interior motives based on their outward actions, their interior ambitions based on what they are doing in front of you right now. This is all very, very, very fraught. But then, significantly, the real import of this scene, the most plot essential part of the scene, is Duncan names his son Malcolm as his successor. He says, "We will establish our estate upon our eldest Malcolm, whom we name hereafter the Prince of Cumberland." Now, primogeniture, the rule of the firstborn inheriting all the family wealth, is a policy. It is not a rule, and it was not at all certain. And up until this point, Macbeth has been saying, well, maybe I don't have to actually kill him. I only know the witches only told me that I will be king hereafter, so maybe I just have to wait out Duncan. He's an older man. He's going to die soon. I'll just let fate take its course, relying on fate to take its course, so that he doesn't have to act. He doesn't have to exercise agency. He can just sit there and be the passive recipient of fate. But of course, it doesn't really work that way. So by naming his successor, Duncan is boxing Macbeth in. He can no longer rely on that. He can no longer passively wait for it, because Duncan is an older man and he'll be dead soon, perhaps. Malcolm is a much younger man, and he might be around for a long time, and Macbeth isn't going to want to wait that long. So he senses immediately what the problem is. And in an aside, he turns to the audience, and Macbeth says, "The Prince of Cumberland, that is a step on which I must fall down or else o'erleap." Leaping over is going to be a thing throughout this whole play, because Macbeth is constantly trying to overleap so many things. Nature, other people on the line of succession, the laws of God himself. "For in my way it lies. Stars, hide your fires. Let not the light see my black and deep desires. The eye wink at the hand, yet let that be which the eye fears when it is done to see." Stars hide your fires. Another sense of darkness. Macbeth is always equated with darkness. Lady Macbeth will be too. They are always very dark, dark figures, which estranges them even more from the audience, because the audience, again, is standing in broad daylight in an open air theater in the middle of summer, and those two figures, Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, are always on stage talking about how dark it is and how they want darkness. And so the natural reaction of everybody in the audience is to say, well, that's not real. That's odd, because it's so light out. They're different. They're peculiar, because they emanate this kind of darkness, or they see this darkness that isn't really there. They are misreading nature around them. Very, very significant on a meta level, but significant nonetheless. And also that the division between the act and the deed, and the "at the light see my black and deep desires." He doesn't want to have to face consequences for his actions. He wants to. He doesn't want the consequences. He doesn't even really want to do the actions just yet. But he wants the result. He wants the good part of the results. He doesn't want the peripheral consequences, the unintended consequences. He wants the crown. He doesn't want any of the other blame for what he has to do to get it. The eye wink at the hand. That division between the eye and the hand. The division between the thought and the practice. The division between the interior and the exterior. That constant tension between those two mediums of significance. And we see this little tiny scene building so slowly the plot as it's going through. We're actually building quite rapidly as it's going through, but bit by little bit, even this tiny little scene has some significance there, has the patterns of the overall whole, has all of the DNA of this play woven through it, so that even in this tiny moment, in a setting where we're not even sure where it happens, we can see the play taking shape in its broadest, fullest sense.